Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the early history of the Nakarthan Empire. We're going to be discussing rulers such as Araquitas, Danica, Marcellian, and many more things. So let's begin. So, to understand the Nakarthan Empire's early history, we need to look at King Marcus for a second. King Marcus was the king of Naraka, and can definitely be the person responsible for the creation of the Nakarthan Empire. As you can tell, he led many conquests across the continent during his reign. He died on campaign in the Timberlands, this land here, leaving his kingdom under a series of old successors until his family died out. Fun fact, King Marcus reigned for over 130 years, and he was somewhere in his 150s to 160s when he died. His family died out due to the fact that none of his sons actually none of them actually extended their life using magic. In 319, a man named Yargad was crowned as Yivak, emperor of the new Nakarthan Empire. This was a very prominent thing and led to the rise of the Numo family, who, during King Marcus's reign, had been doing many political moves and rising through the ranks. But now you got this person who claims to be of a higher, more superior title than Marcus, which at first created a lot of controversy. Some things happen, and we gotta talk about Danica. Danica, also known as Sata Danica, was the empress of the Nakarthan Empire from 346 to 371 of the Second Era. She was a religious empress converted to a religion known as Aquism, the worship of Aquadome, Lotus of life and creation. In her reign, she converted the Numo family into the religion and pressed Aquism onto her empire. This began a series of religious wars in Marthia, known as the Marthic Heresy Wars, which would, over time, kill well over millions of people. These wars were some of the most brutal that Marthia had ever seen, and would involve many sides over time, slowly converting Marthia into the religion of Aquism, sort of. There was also conflict across the empire, mainly with rebellions against the forced conversions. So you see in the Timberlands is many rebellions. There's also in the Center Desert regions. There's also pretty prominent rebellions, religious rebellions, which definitely kill lots of people. However, eventually, in one of these rebellions, Danica would be killed by Etrus, an Etmor who declared himself emperor in 376. Oh, shit. Okay. Changes in the Nakarthan Empire during this period of time. In the period of time from the early 300s to Danica's reign, the army was split into towards different provinces due to no major threat in the empire. This allowed the army to run around and secure the provinces which had been conquered by the Nakarthans. Due to the increased constructions of roads and infrastructure and everything, trade between the provinces increased over time, allowing for different resources from different parts of the empire to, well, be transferred. This was a huge economic boost to the empire. The Algamorans would be heavily persecuted. Now, this is kind of the dark side of the Nakarthan Empire's history, as well, they killed many, many Algamorans. It heavily started with the religious persecutions, but it also turned into kind of other things, if you get what I mean. This would eventually lead to a genocide against the Algamorans, which would be quite ugly. A lot of infrastructure was being built across the empire. So not just roads and bridges, but also entire cities were being made, such as, for example, the city of Marthia, which would be reconquered somewhere in the 300s, or early 400s, depending on whatever I think of in the future. You also got cities like Velgak and later on South Gold, which would be heavily built up, and many, many more. The Elven Usurpation Period. So as I said before, an Elven Etmoran, aka High Elf, nobleman named Etrus, leading a rebellion, managed to capture and execute Danica. He declared himself Emperor Yivak of the Nakarthan Empire in 5 years. His reign was unpopular, and he would be killed several years later. There would be four more emperors who were of his same race, which would lead to the son of Danica, Araquitas, capturing the city of Nartha and executing Sago, which would bring an end to a period of instability. So you see, during this period of time from 371 to 386, I believe, there was a lot of political turmoil, and well, this kind of led to somewhat of a destabilization of the empire during the period of time, which would have to be fixed by Araquitas. Araquitas' reign was mainly focused on reforming the emperor's governance, strengthening the rule of the emperor. The emperor already had a lot of power, but under Araquitas, the power of the emperor significantly increased. One way he did this was by sending much more representatives of him, loyal subjects, to ensure that the subjects in question, the provinces and everything, were doing as they were told. He conquered lands in the Timberlands, mainly to gather resources or to eliminate brigands and attacking tribes. The Timberlands were a very huge issue for the Nakarthan Empire as a whole. And you get many of these tribes who continuously attack the Nakarthans and make the area unprofitable. Despite this, for prestigious reasons and the fact that there was a lot of wood and rare metals in Timberlands, they kept it and continued to extort resources. There was also many killings against the locals during this period of time. Araquitas also lowered the taxes of the powerful and the peasantry to secure his power effectively. This gathered him a lot of support in this gathered him a lot of support from all sides due to the fact that taxes were pretty high at this time. He also strengthened the army by allowing low-income people to join. So before then, you had to fund your own army. You had to fund your own weaponry and armor, and it was very difficult to join the army. But now, for lower income people, the army would give them a basic set of gear. Now, for granted, it wasn't the best gear, and low income people still had a harder time in the army than more wealthier people. But this was a significant improvement and led to the expansion of the army. And then finally, he continued to religious persecutions and killings that were started by his mother. Now, this led to many wars, as I said, the Marcellic heresy wars, but also many wars in the Timberlands, which killed a lot of people as well. Now, many of these wars would actually extend to areas outside of the empire. Like in the Marcellic heresy wars, it wasn't just in the Nakarthan controlled parts of Marcia that were affected, it was all of Marcia, including the lands west of the whatever boundaries were there at the time. The Emperor of Gold. In 417, Araquitas was killed by his son Marcellian, who would ascend to the throne 2 years later. Figures like Marcellian, Danica, Marcus deserve their own videos due to their complex nature. 2 years later, he would ascend to the throne. He would continue many of the reforms of his father. His reign was mainly focused on economics, so meaning that he placed things such as low tariffs on merchants, and he also owned many private industries, like like mines and even a shipping company that actually funded its own explorations and began trade with Vanza, as it says here. In 431, however, he did his most unique achievement, which was the conquest of Goldland and Shuika. Now, this conquest was actually quite easy for him because, for one, he was actually from Goldland, and And though he was a Nakarthan emperor, he very much saw himself as his homeland was Goldland and Nartha. So he felt that he had two homelands due to the fact that Goldland was where he was born and where he was raised, yada yada. Now this began the Nakarthan domination over the Goldlands, which would lead to many, many wars lasting hundreds of years until eventually, somewhere in the 800s, they would be kicked out. The Nakarthans, during the reign of Marcellian, also discovered the continent of Vanza and began trade between the two continents. I have some videos that include the continent of Vanza, so if you want to see how that looks, just browse through my channel and you should find them. Marcellian is one of the most important figures in Nakarthan history. He significantly improved the wealth of the Nakarthan Empire, and if you look at this map, this is kind of like the territorial height of the Nakarthan Empire before things gone down. So you can see this gray is kind of like temporary, and soon after they lose it. The rest of this dark gray is what they were able to keep for a long time. Continual stabilization. Even after Marcellian's death, things were still stable. Under Matamitas and Ramalov, things were stabilized, and the empire, other than major conflicts in Goldland, religious persecutions in certain parts of the empire, did not necessarily see itself under any major crisis. Now this is kind of seen as some sort of like a Pax Nakartha period, but it really wasn't, due to the many religious wars and the full-out genocide in Al Gamor. And though there was no major war between two superpowers, things were still far from peaceful in the Nakarthan Empire. However, the period of time in the 400s would become known as the century of the four emperors, due to the fact that there were only four emperors during the entire 400th century. 5th century of the Second Era, if you want to be technical. After Ramalov's deaths, there would be a series of several somewhat successive emperors, and you would essentially see Okkar the Brute. Okkar conquered all of Goldland for the second time, bringing it under the Empire again, and then invaded all of Marthia, but he didn't actually get to keep it all. He also tried to conquer into literally any territory. So let's go back here. So he moved his armies towards the west into Marthia, these areas, and then he moved his armies south here. He also tried to move his armies into the Timberlands. You see, the Timberlands was still very profitable in the eyes of many people, but his most notable attempt, and one of the most stunning failures, was his attack on Rockland here. In the Battle of Manzafa, or something else, I might change it later, he was defeated and nearly killed. Half of his army was wiped out, and this was one of the worst disasters in Nakarthan history. Going back to continual stabilization. After Orkar's death, you see a series of weak emperors that would come in. They're known as the Heckelson family. So you got Heckelson first, second, third, fourth, fifth. There was a Yargod in there as well, Yargod the third, who was still pretty weak. But in a different video, I'm going to talk about the Heckelsons in more detail. That's it for the end. This is the end of the video. I appreciate you watching. Sorry if I stutter or am confusing. You can always ask questions in the comments. Make sure you let me know how you thought of this video in the comments below. If you want to, you can like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Make sure to check my community posts quite frequently, as I'll do questions and polls and fun facts and other things. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope each and every one of you has a good day or night. See you another time.